Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I found out the hard way just now that wearing a green jungle shirt to be thematic with today's episode didn't work with the green screen. So all I got is this dark green shirt, but I do have the coast of South America behind me, a hint at the Amazons, which is a work we'll be discussing today. But in general, today's conversation is going to be about women in literature and looking specifically at epic poetry, which is not what you may think it is if you are someone who is not an avid reader or into literature. It's not like regular poetry or, you know, well, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna break down. I'm gonna have the expert on the call here break down what is, epic poetry, what is, go over different writing styles throughout time, and we're gonna get into it with Mr. Peter Gunn. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Brisky. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so can we start with, I know you're a U.S. Air Force veteran. Can you please tell us about your time in the service real quick?
Well, I did 21 years total. I did about a year in the Guard, then 14 years active duty, and then I did the rest in the reserves. But I was Air Force the entire time.
Wow, yeah, that's a long time. So what made you stay in that long? Were you enjoying it, or was it just once you got to a
Um,
certain point, it's like you might as well stay in, or
yeah, I mean, there's always, at a certain point where, you have retirement points. Okay, so you might as well, push it through, and then you get a little check when you retire. But I believe in serving, people other than myself. So serving the country always appealed to me. So it wasn't really, it was easy for me to make this decision, really.
yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned previously, we're going to be getting into epic poetry and literature. We're going to break it down, but let's start with your passion for that kind of content. Was that prior to your military service, during it, afterward? How did that get introduced into your life?
Well, one of the things that always stayed in my mind is when in it was mentioned in The Hobbit, when Gandalf mentioned to Bilbo about carrying the sword instead of a walking stick.
Mm,
And that always correlated in my mind to joining the military. So going out and fighting versus just going out doing what you want to do, And
mm,
um, I wish a lot of younger people would do it more informed, not just quick find a recruiter and sign a contract, just because he puts money there, but do your homework because I went and do like the VA and stuff like that, and I talked to a lot of retirees and I asked them one basic question is, if you had to do it all over again, what service would you go in? And surprisingly, the Marines said the Air Force, the Navy
yeah.
said the Air Force.
Yeah.
So I mean, the Army said the Air Force. So I'm like, okay, I'll go in the Air Force. Yeah, and I think it is most unlike normal military or most unlike the other branches. It is run a lot like in ways like a corporation. Okay. Yeah, but it's still military. It's still military. You can still get an Article 15 if you mess up.
Yeah, 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 for sure. You don't want to get one of those. It's funny. We would, every chain of command you go to, at least in the beginning, will ask you, why did you join or whatever it is, your little origin story. And so many people said the Air Force recruiting office was closed. That's how I ended up in the Navy. Obviously in the Navy, we call it the chair force because y'all sit around all day. But yeah,
Mhm,
most people would have gone to Air Force. And even if it wasn't a different branch, just researching the different rates or MOSs or jobs, whatever, each branch has their terms, researching those before you make a decision. Like you said, so many people will see the bonus,
mhm, mhm.
which, I take it with a grain of salt. The larger the bonus, I'm more skeptical. Like, why is it such a large bonus? I
Yes,
learned,
exactly. Good, good. Yes, that's
yeah,
exactly what you want to be skeptical. What you really want to look at is marketable skills when you get out. Because there are jobs where they'll even allow us a smaller 3-year enlistment versus a four, and you could come out with a marketable skill that will allow you to make six figures, depending on what it is. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and that's one thing people really, and the younger generation need to look at is what skills you're going to have when you get out. Can it be a career when you get out if you have to?
That is important because so many people will say, well, it's going to say military on a resume, and that's going to be a free pass to any job. And, there are hire a veteran programs, and there are plenty of
Hmm.
resources out there to help you. But they're just an assistance. They're not a guarantee all, and it can be very difficult. I mean, of course, on the show, we've had multiple episodes dedicated just to career transitioning as a veteran. And to summarize them quickly, your resume, if you don't choose wisely, your rate for the military is going to basically give you nothing on your
Yeah.
resume.
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
there's going to be hundreds of y'all with the same
Hmm.
exact cookie cutter
Hmm.
resume. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something to think about. It, whether you're getting out or staying in, what's it looking like if I stay in job wise? What's it look like if I'm getting out? Do I want to do the same thing when I'm getting out? Because
Yeah.
plenty of people can have a huge resume with all these military skills, and then you're like, well, I want to be, white collar side, not blue collar side, or vice versa.
Well,
So
also think about it is okay, you could do what you did in the military once you get out as a transition. So it's sort of a cushion. So you have a job, have money coming in while you're going to school or transitioning to the next, point in your life.
yeah, yeah. And so you talked about, your analogy there with the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and then
Hmm.
kind of, so the military, are you saying the military was kind of your staff, so to say, you chose to do what you wanted to do, not just you were kind of forced into that situation?
Well, it it always appealed to me, in the military movies and stuff like that. And then, of course, I said I initially went into the Air National Guard, and what I did was they give you an ASVAB, so it's like an
Yeah.
IQ test, okay? And I did rather well, and then the recruiter just threw the book at me and said, "Here, pick any job you want." So I did that, and the guard always has to wait for spots for active duty. Active duty goes first. Finally went to boot camp, and then something clicked. It all made sense. I loved it. I enjoyed
Oh,
boot
okay.
camp. It was fun for me. And I like, okay, yeah, I could do this as a career. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
An IQ test where your IQ is, can you pick the best multiple choice answer? At least I don't know about when you went in, but when I went in, it was multiple choice. So
Yes, yes, it is. It
yeah,
is. Yeah.
and
Hmm.
I mean, it's not a guarantee, right? If you just go with no knowledge, you're gonna get, just by chance a good score. But it's an interesting test, and obviously you want to do good on it. But
Hmm.
let's get
Yes.
into
Yeah.
um one of the things that it doesn't really weigh, which I hate with the ASVAB or any standardized testing, the analysis of your literary and word skills is always like, it's not, are you a good writer? Are you a good reader? It's, we have a very specific word we want to use. Do you know that word?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
Yes.
obviously the military was not necessarily where you could flourish as a writer, but as we discussed, you're an author. So when did that whole part of your journey begin?
Well, I will say the concept for the Amazons came into mind when I had my daughter back in 2010. Because, as a father, you want to introduce your children to things that you enjoy, and that you enjoyed as a child. And I went in there in the literature section in the poetry, and of course that you always have your staples, the Iliad, the Odyssey by Homer. You have Beowulf. You have all the Dante's Inferno, and there's nothing wrong with it. They're great. But then I start to look around, and there's love poetry, but there's no epic hero's journey for the females. The fact that it doesn't really exist is like saying that they're not good enough. Our mothers, our daughters, or sisters aren't good enough to have that hero's journey. And I felt bad. I'm like, wow, something needs to be done about that. Someone should write something for the feminine.
Yeah. And so with that being said, what I want to understand is because I read the Amazons and it's a great read. I love the plot. Wasn't at all what I was expecting, so I love that. But if we're trying to empower women and make them feel represented, why did you choose to write it from, a kind of centered around the men are the main protagonists and the women are antagonists. Some of them are protagonists. Why did you choose not to write it from a woman's perspective?
Because it needs to be able to be relatable first off, because the Amazons aren't humans. They're quote
Okay.
unquote demigods.
Okay.
Okay, and write it from the point of view of a demigod would be somewhat difficult, and we need
Yeah.
to write it from humanity's point of view. Okay.
Okay.
And then also, I wanted to work in the fact that women aren't alone. We need to, as men and women, we need to become like a synergy and work together.
Right.
Okay, so you can't have one without the other. One is they're more powerful together. So I refused to leave out the masculine, but
Yeah.
I wanted to integrate the feminine as well.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just trying to understand that. Like I said, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with it. And I think I liked it. I liked the way it was written, where you have some women who just villainize men or, turn them into an object, and you see the counter arguments for that, how that's wrong. And I think that's good. I think it's always hard to have a balance, in these kind of things where like we saw with like the Barbie movie or Companion, there's been a lot of content coming out lately where it's always a lot of one way or the other. There's not really a lot of compromise, which relationships in real life, balance is about compromise where the men are flawed in some aspects and the women are flawed in some aspects and they're good in some and good in
Hmm.
others. But a lot of times we see this one or the other gender is just totally the antagonist, whereas you had a mixture of it. So I like that. And so I have to ask, has your daughter read your works?
I've read it to her, although I did
Okay.
have to leave out some of the racier stuff in the first
For
stanza.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And what did she think? How old is she for just reference? Because I know
She's
this
14.
is
She's
a
14 now. Yeah.
okay. It's a bit of a more advanced reading level kind of content for
Well,
sure.
you know, the thing is once you start to understand LLP, linked lyrical poetry, a lot of people are like, what am I reading at first? And then,
Yeah.
oh, now I get it, and that's another thing is I felt it's important to stand out. The pentameter of normal poetry is expected, the dum 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 da da da, and the
Yeah.
repetitive. To write a novel in that way, it's just not going to stick. It's not going to keep a person's attention.
Mm.
And I couldn't certainly not do it. I couldn't do it the way like the Iliad and the Odyssey was doing it. I needed something different. Okay. So I needed to come up with my own special way or poetry, LLP, and a lot of people say it sounds like rap, like the flow of rap, because the words, the lyrical poetry are linked from sentence to sentence to sentence to sentence. So it's like reading rap in a way or a song.
Yeah, it's a very interesting reading style. And I remember when I was reading it, I had a little chuckle to myself. You had a note to the reader in the beginner that says, I fired all my editors.
I had
This is
to.
unconventional writing. Like
Y-
they want me to do it this way. I'm gonna do it my way. So
You
I did
have
have a
no
chuckle.
idea how many arguments I got into with editors. There was an argument over the word um purse or unpurse. Now I tell you, you tell somebody you purse something, you understand that, and then if you were to unpurse something, you would understand that. I needed the word unpurse in order to keep the rhyme scheme. Okay.
Yeah.
Editor just flew off the handle. He said, "No, that's not a word." Now he's right. It's not a word, but poetry is art, and this is a brushstroke on a canvas. And he's criticizing my brushstroke on a canvas. Okay. So you have to say no, no, and you have to stand up for yourself. And no, this is the way it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and as long as the context is there, the people are going to be tracking. So I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, it's important to have that independency and say, hey, this is, how I want it to be and it's going to work, and to trust in you. And so you have another work that I didn't get to read, and hopefully I pronounced this right, the Karupi's Curse, or is it?
Yes. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, so can you give us a little breakdown about that?
Well, that goes back into ancient South American folklore. okay, about the gods and what they believed to be deities that lived among them. Okay, there's not very much written about them. And I
Hmm.
felt that, well, since I had started on the Amazons, I might as well go ahead and then start on a children's book as well. My friend Andrea Giordani, she's the one that did the audiobook with me on that. She has a wonderful voice. And if you ever have a book that you just want your kids to listen to, go to bedtime, that's the perfect book. And it also, I made it a point to there show a positive light on the feminine and have a strong female presence. So the majority of the book is about the princess, okay, and about her strife and how she came to be and what she had to put up with. Yeah, it's there is a evil deity that they believe in. They're even talking about today called the Karapi.
Yeah.
And it's funny how the South Americans were talking about it. Like they'll actually say, like, if someone has an ugly baby, oh, you mated with the Karapi, you know?
Hmm. Huh.
But they actually believe it to be, some believe that it still exists today, but it was an evil deity that was always pulling tricks, sort of like Loki in other folklore, Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was the perfect person to bring into the novel and make the antagonists. Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about the Amazons and then the Corruptee's Curse. And then I know on your website under the coming soon page, you have the Sigma Squad hunting the
Mhm.
deep state. When do we have an estimated timeline for that? And can we have just a little overview?
Well, that goes into let's see here, conspiracy theories. Okay, I
Mm.
mean, I think a lot of us loved like the X-Files. You ever watched those on television? That series?
No, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay,
It
okay.
generates a lot of
Basic,
attraction. Yeah.
yes, it generates a lot of attraction because and I always like to do this because I'll do this in the Amazons. I'll do it in the Krabby's Curse. I do it in all my writings. I'll integrate truth into fiction. Okay, I call it doing pulling a Dan Brown. Okay, that leaves the person wondering, well, wait a minute, is this true or isn't it? But
Yeah.
there's so many conspiracies out there, that I decided to bring them into a graphic novel to show people what is really going on behind the scenes, in the conspiracy theories versus what they may have heard. Because there's a lot of people that don't want to pick up a book without pictures. Okay, but they
Yeah.
will pick up.
It's,
Look, you look at the mega section in any bookstore. It's huge, or the comics. Okay,
yeah.
there's a lot of people that don't want to read a book without pictures. So this is an easier transition for that to help them understand by pictures what's going on behind the scenes. But it starts from the ancient Gnostic Gospels. They will actually talk about um, where angels are split into two halves. So there's a male and a female. They call them aeons, and they're then brought to Earth, okay, to do God's work, okay. And then there's also beings called hylates that are sort of like empty shells that are commanded and possessed by the evil entities that walk among us. And then there's a war raging between both of them for humanity, okay. And basically, I go into the main characters are ANs or angels that are down on Earth, and they go into in the first issue Bohemian Grove, kill all the elites, blow it up, okay, and you will see what's going on behind the scenes in the novel. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it gets pretty graphic. Yeah,
Yeah. And so it's going to be the whole thing is going to be a whole graphic novel.
yeah, I'm expecting at least 150 pages, if not more. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So that's quite the time-consuming endeavor to
Yes,
work on for
yes.
sure.
Yeah,
For
I have a
sure.
great team that helps me out too because a lot of times I'll do the rough sketches and then I'll hand it over to my artists on my team and then they'll finish it for me. And that's the way it goes because when you start becoming an entrepreneur and you start pushing out more and more on your own, you need help. You need help.
Yeah.
You can't do it alone. Yes. Yeah. So it's I love my team and I thank them, the Lord for them every day for what they do for me.
Yeah. And I gotta ask, is this you on the front cover of Sigma Squad? He's got the same square top military
I
cut as
now
you with the blonde
I
hair.
I did style the character's name is Sly, okay? But
Nice.
I did style him a little bit it looks to look a little bit like me. And then the other character is Sun, and she is one of my good friends. So we were, it's funny, we were talking one day about the psychological type of the Sigma, the Sigma
Mm.
male, the Sigma female,
Yeah.
because we were joking about how the alphas, we always seem to piss them off just by being ourselves. So we
Mm.
were joking and like, well, what are we? And we started looking it up, and we seem to fit into that Sigma category. So we decided to call ourselves the Sigma Squad. Yeah,
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
And so I'm excited for that. That looks good. And like you said, yeah, a lot of people are just into the more visual aspect, especially nowadays. And I've gotten more into graphic novels as well and comic books.
Hmm.
I appreciate both forms of literature. I think it's important to have that strong foundation in reading the classics, and I hope that over time they will continue to put visual aids and formats to classic stories that just don't
Yeah.
have those. I know that I'll give a controversial example. A lot of people have started designing like graphic novels for the Bible, for stories from the
Hmm.
Bible, which there's
Hmm.
always
Yeah.
been movies, TV shows, but people are trying to make comic book styles to entice more readers. But they say, hey, faith is hoping that which has not yet been seen, so you shouldn't
Hmm.
have to see all this stuff. But I follow some AI generator channels that do just Bible scenes, and I think it's great. And I think I'd love to see like they're trying to make a musical called Epic based on the Odyssey, and they're trying to make it into a musical just like Hamilton was. So I think it's so many people, especially younger generations, are just into different art styles, different forms of literature, and it's important to try to not necessarily say cater to those, but if we want to put out a good work and have more people enjoy it, then sometimes we have to do that as long as we're not compromising our artistic vision or message. So I think that's the important part there. As long as you're still getting the message across in the same way, I think that's important.
Oh yeah,
Which
people learn in different ways. I mean, putting a book in front of somebody isn't always going to work. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, so it's important to keep that in mind. And then I had saw on your website as well the love continuum or love's continuum.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a love story that I had started writing for a friend, and we were going to make it into a podcast. It's actually a full 45-minute podcast. Um, but everyone's like, well, you should make it into a book as well. So I'm working on that little by little. But with the whole press and everything about the Amazons, um, I am focusing most of my time on making the Amazons too, because I do want to make it into a trilogy. And I'd say I'm about 50% of the way done right now, but there's still a lot more work to do. And especially writing an LLP, I mean, no publisher wants to hear that I could sit there for an hour and maybe get a paragraph sometimes.
Mhm.
No one has,
Yeah.
very few people have the patience to do it. So it's time consuming.
I want our listeners to understand better just how difficult it is to write an LLP. So can you break down the requirements for it, the structure for it, so they understand like it's not just like writing a regular story. There is so
No.
much intellectual thought and strategy that has to go into writing it.
Well, I always use the analogy of think of a mason building a brick wall. Okay, standard, red bricks, and mortar, and he has a plumb bob and he makes it nice and straight, does row after row after row. Someone comes in, does quality control, tells him to make some changes. That might be like the editor, okay, and the mason is the writer. And it's very straightforward, okay? And you could put out pages and pages and pages, and you could put out an entire building in a couple of days with that. But with LLP, nothing standard. So you need to fit in the words to make them work. Okay, you have to look at context. So that could be akin to making a natural stone wall where you actually have to, you can't just start putting it up. You have to look at the shapes of the stone, Do they fit? Which ones are going to be best for the corners? Okay, the mortar is not going to be flush. You're going to have to make changes
Yeah.
in every step of the way. Okay, so LLP, the basic premise is where the last word in the sentence should rhyme with the first word of the sentence. Okay, and then therefore then be linked. Okay, and then of course it should continue from next sentence, next sentence, next sentence, and then you sometimes the words write the story, and you have to allow it to happen. But then also be prepared to where you might spend a day or two on three paragraphs, but then realize you can't, you came to a dead end. You can't write what you want to write. So you need to start from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's time consuming. It's time consuming, but it's very much worth it. Yeah, everyone says that once they figure it out, they're like, I just had a vocal artist tell me that he was astounded, like he couldn't believe it when he was on page two of how
Yeah.
much time this must have taken. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, it requires a lot of patience,
Yes.
that
Yes, it
I
does.
can imagine that it's definitely interesting. And I have a couple, projects that I've started working on that I'm trying to write like in the style of Wuthering Heights, a certain book, which for anyone who hasn't read that, it's not Old English, it's not New English, and it's nothing in between. It is its own thing. I remember
Mhm.
like because in high school, I read plenty of Shakespeare, plenty of other stuff. We got to even Beowulf and other, epic poems. And then we got to Wuthering Heights and was just like, what is this language? So
Mhm. Mhm.
it's interesting. And, I really admire like, the skill and the time that you put into this. It shows how much love for your craft that you have.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I appreciate you, guesting on podcasts to share this because I think, like you said, it's important because I don't, during that time period, women were viewed a different way.
Yes,
But
they were.
instead of seeing literature catch up to where we are nowadays in society, we saw a lot of literature just left behind. And I think
Mhm.
it's important, like you said, your mission is to bring back epic poetry. So I really admire what you do. And I know we've kind of talked about the future in terms of you continuing to write and do this. And I'm definitely excited for the Amazons too. There was a lot of things left unknown that I was
Yeah.
like, well, that was
Well,
never addressed. That was
you
never
have to
done.
leave your audience hanging when
Yeah,
in
of
your writing.
course.
Yeah.
Just not hanging from a tree upside down with the throat
Yeah.
slit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really exciting to see that. And then ultimately, I assume a hope of yours is to see the Amazons adapted into some kind of other form of media, whether it's a TV show or a movie, or do you plan on doing a graphic
I
novel
am currently
version?
in talks with an undisclosed business that is a little interested in making the Amazons into a CGI, sort of like Star Wars, that sort of CGI. Yeah. So
Okay.
we're in discussions right now. I don't know if anything will come of it, but
Yeah,
they said
yeah.
they were looking for a good story and that fits within a certain time frame, and the Amazons is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really exciting and I think it's awesome. And you know, what would you say? I know we talked a little bit about representing women, so just to recap it, what would you say your message is across all of your written works that you're working on? What would you say is your main message for the women out there, especially for women who want to write, for women who want to do those non-traditional roles or jobs or careers that society may say, "Hey, you're a woman, you shouldn't be doing this."
Don't let fear stop you. Okay. Throw down the walking stick and pick up the sword if you want to. Don't let fear stop you from living your life. Just because someone says you're just a woman, that should be even more so to show that you can do it. You know, I feel bad because like I have worked with a lot of women in the military, and I remember specifically one that she was pushing into toolboxes rating, and she was just covered in dirt, and she looks up at me and she said, I would have to work three times as hard to get just the same credit as the guys. And that just stuck with me because it bothered me. It's not fair. It's not fair. Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the Amazons. It's for women like that, to inspire them to go out and do what they want to do. Yeah, don't let anything stop you.
When you brought up the military, that's one of the focal points in our society where women aren't treated the same. I feel like,
No,
at least from what I've
no.
personally experienced,
They,
I've
they'll
seen a
tell
lot
you
of
they
it.
are.
Yeah,
The public affairs officials will tell you, but they're not. They're not. No,
yeah.
no.
That's what I was gonna say is like that's why I was like where they're not treated the same because like publicly, they put forward so much like celebrating, Women's Month or w
Mhm,
women's mental health or this and that and they're trying to, change things. But I've still met a lot of higher ups who talked about how they were, naval officers and they just weren't treated with respect because they were a woman. Or I've seen
mhm.
even like not even just in the military, just in plenty of workplaces, we've seen that kind of behavior.
Yep.
And I think it's especially true military and blue collar side, when women are willing to and want to do that kind of manual labor or that more blue collar work, we see a lot of like kind of that side eye and or a lot of insults too, or this idea that oh they must be lesbian or want to be a man or all this stuff instead of like we see their femininity taken away from them.
Mhm. Well, they have to put up with, unfortunately, a lot of stuff that we don't have to put up with in the workplace. So, I mean, like harassment, sexual harassment, stuff like that. So, um, it's especially important for them to push and don't let that affect them and push through it and just be the best person that you can be, Yeah. Be more than what society expects of you, and just keep pushing through.
Yeah, and hopefully your works are inspiring young women to do that. And I hope it brings about a interest back into epic poetry. And before we close off, I want to mention as well on your website it says that you're a speaker, so I'd love for you to
Yep.
share with everyone what you speak on.
Well, I have pre-made LLP speeches, okay? And the one I usually use the most, I call is literature is dead.
Mm,
And the reason I decided to call it that is because I speak to a lot of writers. And then when you tell that to a writer, they automatically gets their attention, like, what's this crazy guy talking about?
yeah.
And then I have their attention. And then I actually, the speech is about um, how the heart isn't used enough. People don't
Mm,
realize that, like, when you got writer's block, isn't necessarily your brain, it might be your heart. Okay.
yeah.
If your heart isn't in it, you could think of you could think of a great idea, but you're able to flow with it as a writer. If you'd be stuck. And it's important to integrate your heart and your brain into your writing in order to be able to give the best work.
I agree with that 100% because I've got my 10th and 11th book coming out this year and it really is that matter of heart. I really
Yeah,
agree with that,
yeah,
that heart, and I've always had the issue where my heart wants to write too much. Like you come on, we
yes,
gotta come back a little bit. But and I can't even imagine the frustration of being restricted the way you are in structure and words and wanting to write and you're like, oh well, how do I word this? Is there a word for that?
exactly.
Like you said,
Yes, yes.
even having to make up a few words, but like I said, as long as they work and people know what you're saying, then
Mhm.
it's cool. I like almost like abstract artwork in a sense, like
Yes.
you said, the canvas and the brush. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's important to, you know, reassess it. Are you having trouble thinking of a plot, or is it you've got plot points, but you're just not feeling them, and that's okay,
And
because
that's a sign
that's
you
a
should be
good
aware
thing.
of. If you're not feeling it, then your heart's saying, there's something wrong. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'll say something that I know some other people would disagree with, especially editors, but hopefully you'll be on my side given your history with them. But I say write for yourself first and the audience second. And what I mean by that is some people will change their plot or their characters or try to write what will sell best or what will this community like more. If you do not like the story, if your heart is not in it, it doesn't matter. And that's my personal
Yes.
opinion. I would
Yeah.
never want to write and
Well,
conform my whole book to someone else's image. That's not what it's
those
about.
are big name writers that have ghost writers working for them and just push out. books. That's all they do is push out book after book after book. Yeah. It's not, and not everything's from the heart in when it comes from them,
And you can
unfortunately.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. So if you're out there, write what you want to write. Like if they want something different, they can go find it. There's hundreds of
Mhm.
books out there, or they can make it themselves, but stick to what your vision is and what you want, and the rest will follow. And so in the description below, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have Mr. Gunn's, information so y'all can check out the Amazons, the Karupi's Curse, and then in the future, the Sigma Squad and Lowe's Continuum and the Amazons too. And I'm sure a couple of years from now, there'll be several other
Yes.
unexpected books and graphic
Well, we,
novels
we
and epic
writers
poems.
always have like ideas in the back of our head, so we'll
Yeah.
file it away, but eventually it might come into existence.
Yeah, it's what I felt as an author is it's just there's no time. It's like I
Yes.
have all these
Yes.
things I want to write, but I can
Mhm.
only work on one at a time really, or maybe two or three if I'm careful. But I still only have so much time in a day. And sometimes it's like, hey, I sat down for an hour and I wrote a whole chapter. And other times, like you said, I sat down for an hour and I wrote a paragraph. Every
Mhm.
day is
Yeah.
different, every
Yeah.
book is different. So like I said, everyone. We'll have your website in the description below for them to check out what you currently have. And I encourage everyone to just keep going back and seeing what you put out. But yeah, Mr. Gunn, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I think it's something that you're the first person I've met doing this, and you may be the only
Okay.
person I ever meet who's doing this. So I really appreciate that dedication and what you're doing. I definitely want to see a resurgence of classic literature from epic poetry to just Shakespeare style stuff. Just everything nowadays, especially with AI, is just so copy paste, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to see a resurgence of appreciation for this old literature that people are like, oh, it's too sexist or too this or that. Well, it doesn't have to be. We've got
Well,
plenty of
they
authors
have to,
nowadays.
like, it might be written in the 1500s. They have to keep that in mind. When it was things like
Yeah,
that was commonplace. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to. We have capable minds and writers like yourself and like others
Mhm.
out there who can give us something modern that is still in that old style. So I appreciate that. And I encourage
Yeah.
anyone out there who is thinking about writing and you're like, well, I don't know if people are going to want to read an LLP. What if people don't want to read, Shakespearean style thing? I'm telling you, do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe
So
in yourself. Believe in yourself. Listen to that voice. Yeah, listen to that voice. There's no such thing as a stupid idea. There is such a thing as an undeveloped idea. Something made that idea come into your head. Just develop it. Yeah, there might be a grain of genius there.
yeah, like
Yeah.
you said, it's everything is growth. I every time I've gone to write something. And you can testify to this, where it started originally, day one, to where it ended when it was published, a very different thing.
Yes,
and
yes.
still built on that foundation, but drastically different.
It's like seeing a child grow up. You're like, wow, I never thought it would, yeah, that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, Mr. Gunn, I appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing it. Like I said, I encourage everyone to check out your works, and I hope that they do well. And I'm excited for the Amazons too.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mr. Whiskey. I appreciate it.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors, my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.